Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to have you here. Today, we are going to master how to identify and apply the appropriate roles and permissions for sites in SharePoint Online. Let's get started. Let's dive into our first topic. What exactly is SharePoint Access Control? In Microsoft 365, SharePoint Online provides the platform for document management, team collaboration, and intranet portals. The basics of access control here dictate that user access is primarily governed by Microsoft 365 group membership and granular site-level permissions. But why do we care so much about this? Because without properly configured permissions, you risk massive data exposure. A robust permission model ensures that users can access and share content securely. The how begins by understanding that permissions exist on two planes, the tenant level for IT administrators and the site level for everyday business users. As we deep dive today, keep the zero trust principle of least privilege in mind. It dictates that users should be granted only the minimum level of access necessary to perform their tasks. This principle is the bedrock of everything we will build today. Let's direct our attention to the diagram on your screen. This flowchart represents the foundational access hierarchy. At the very top, we have Microsoft Entra ID. This is your identity provider. It is the gatekeeper that authenticates every single user. Once authenticated, the user interacts with Microsoft 365 services, specifically SharePoint Online, located in the middle of our flow. Notice how access to SharePoint branches into two distinct paths. On the left, we have admin roles. These are the highly privileged tenant-level roles, such as global administrators and SharePoint administrators, who manage site collections and global policies. On the right, we have site-level roles. This is where the everyday collaboration happens. These roles dictate what business users can do within a specific site, categorizing them into owners, members, and visitors. Understanding this visual split is your first step to mastering SharePoint governance. Now that we understand the big picture, let's focus on the what and basics of site-level roles. Every SharePoint site comes with three primary roles: owners, members, and visitors. Why 3 roles? This triad perfectly maps to standard business needs, allowing you to easily categorize users based on how they need to interact with data. How do these work in practice? Let's deep dive. A visitor is granted read-only access. They can consume content, like reading a company policy, but they cannot change a single comma. A member is granted edit access. These are your collaborators. They can upload, modify, and delete documents within the site libraries. Finally, the owner has full control over the site. Owners can not only edit content, but they can also manage the site's settings, alter navigation, and most importantly, manage the permissions of other members and visitors. Assigning the right role here is the easiest way to enforce that least privilege concept we discussed earlier. Take a look at this state diagram. It beautifully illustrates the escalating privileges of our 3 core roles. On the far left, we have the site visitor. As noted in the box, their state is strictly read-only. They are consumers of information. Moving to the center, we step up to the site member. Their state includes edit access. They are the active participants in your SharePoint environment, uploading and modifying the day-to-day files. Finally, on the right, we reach the apex of site-level power, the site owner. Their state is full control. They don't just interact with the content, they govern the environment itself. As a trainer, I always emphasize this to my teams. Never make someone an owner if they only need to be a member, and never make someone a member if they only need to read a document. Sticking to this simple visual hierarchy prevents the vast majority of accidental data deletions and unauthorized changes. Moving on to slide 3, we tackle one of the most powerful and sometimes misunderstood mechanisms in SharePoint: permission inheritance. What is it? By default, SharePoint uses a hierarchical permission model where objects inherit permissions from their parent container. The basics mean that if you grant a user member access at the site level, that access flows downward. Why does SharePoint do this efficiency? Imagine having to manually assign permissions to 10,000 individual files. Inheritance makes management infinitely easier. How it works is top-down, from the site, down to the document library, down to the folder, and finally to the individual item. But here is the deep dive. What if you have a library open to all site members, but one specific folder contains highly sensitive HR data? You can break inheritance. Administrators can sever that top-down flow to apply unique, restricted permissions at any level, ensuring that a specific folder or document is shielded from the broader group. This hierarchical flowchart perfectly demonstrates how permissions flow like a waterfall. At the top, we have the SharePoint site. The solid arrows show the natural flow of inheritance. The permissions cascade down into the document library, pull into the standard folder, and finally soak into the standard document at the bottom. If Sarah is an owner at the top, she is an owner all the way down. But look at the dashed line branching off from the document library to the secure folder. That dashed line represents broken inheritance. We have erected a dam in the waterfall. By breaking inheritance, the secure folder no longer accepts the default permissions flowing from above. Instead, it allows us to establish a brand new set of unique rights, which then flow down to the secure document inside it. This is exactly how you protect sensitive financial or HR data that lives inside a widely accessible team site. Let's clarify a vital relationship: Microsoft 365 groups versus native SharePoint permissions. What are M365 groups? They're a foundational membership service that powers collaboration. The basics here are crucial. Team sites are automatically linked to Microsoft 365 groups. When a team site is created, it provisions a shared library, a group mailbox, and a calendar. Why use them? Efficiency and consistency. When users are added to a Microsoft 365 group, they automatically gain access to the associated SharePoint site. How does this map to what we just learned? Group members typically map directly to SharePoint site members, while group owners map to site owners. The deep dive insight is this: you use Microsoft 365 groups to grant broad, default access to the entire collaboration workspace. However, you still rely on native SharePoint permissions and broken inheritance when you need granular, item-level control that deviates from the standard group access. This lateral graph is one of my favorites for explaining modern architecture. On the left, the Microsoft 365 group acts as the central engine. When you add a user to this group, follow the arrows. The group automatically provisions and grants access to a shared mailbox, a planner board, Microsoft Teams, and, most importantly for us, a SharePoint team site. You don't have to go to 4 different admin centers to grant access. Now, look at the SharePoint team site node. It maps the M365 group identities directly into SharePoint's native roles. The group members seamlessly become site members with edit rights, and the group owners seamlessly become site owners with full control. This automation is brilliant, but as an admin, you must always remember that giving someone group access gives them the keys to all these connected doors. Often, users don't need access to an entire site, they just need one file. Enter sharing links. What are they? They're mechanisms that allow users to collaborate easily by sending view or edit access to specific documents, folders, or libraries. The basics are that a user can generate a link and send it to a colleague, granting them ad hoc access. Why is this important? It prevents users from unnecessarily adding people to the overarching M365 group just to collaborate on a single spreadsheet. How is it executed? A user simply clicks Share on a file and selects the permission level. For the deep dive, sharing links are highly customizable. Administrators and users can configure these links with expiration dates, require password protection, and specify permission levels like view only or edit access. This flexibility gives users just enough access to collaborate without compromising the security of the broader site. Let's walk through the anatomy of a sharing link using this decision tree. When a user selects a document, they encounter a critical choice: the link type. If they choose anyone with the link, which creates an anonymous link, they have powerful security options below it, such as setting mandatory expiration dates or password protection to limit exposure. If they choose people in the org, they can apply restrictions like block download to ensure the data never leaves the cloud session. Finally, specific people creates a highly targeted link requiring identity verification, where the sender explicitly chooses between view or edit access. As a senior admin, your job is to configure the tenant policies so that these options align with your company's risk appetite, perhaps completely disabling anyone links for sensitive departments. Slide 6 brings us to the most pressing challenge in SharePoint today: oversharing. What is it? Oversharing occurs when users grant broader access to SharePoint content than is appropriate or intended. The basics include mistakes like sharing a document with anyone with the link, or providing edit access when a view-only link was sufficient. Why is this a crisis? Because exposing sensitive or regulated data to unauthorized users introduces massive compliance, privacy, and security threats. How do we fight it? Administrators must actively monitor environments using Data Access Governance, or DG, reports to identify sites with excessive sharing. For our deep dive, You can leverage SharePoint Advanced Management, or SAM, which offers restricted site access to prevent unauthorized users from accessing sensitive sites, and utilize sensitivity labels with encryption so only authorized groups can open the files, regardless of who has the link. This mind map breaks down the anatomy of oversharing into its core threats and solutions. Look at the top left, anonymous links. When users share via anyone links, the risks are severe data exposure and a total lack of an audit trail because the user is unknown. On the bottom left, overprivileging giving someone edit rights instead of view rights directly leads to accidental deletions and unauthorized modifications. But look at the right side, remediation. This is your toolkit. You use DG reports to proactively hunt down these exact risky links. You apply sensitivity labels to encrypt the data, rendering stolen links useless to outsiders. And you use restricted site access to build a digital fortress around your most confidential team sites. This is how you govern modern collaboration. In the modern enterprise, we must collaborate with people outside our walls. This brings us to external guest access. What is it? It's the controlled provisioning of access to external partners or vendors. The basics rely on external sharing policies, which determine exactly how users can share content with people outside the organization. Why do we do this? To facilitate real-time, secure B2B collaboration, rather than emailing sensitive attachments back and forth. How is it managed? Through the SharePoint Admin Center, where you can allow guest access for specific sites while requiring authentication for shared links. The deep dive here is vital. You should never leave guest access unmanaged. You must integrate conditional access to require multi-factor authentication for guests, restrict sharing to specific allowed partner domains, and utilize Microsoft Entra access reviews to ensure guest access is revoked the moment a project ends. Let's trace the exact sequence of secure external collaboration. On the far left, our internal user generates a secure, specific people, sharing link in SharePoint and targets an external vendor. SharePoint sends an email invitation to the guest user. When the guest clicks that link, they don't bypass security. They are routed directly to Microsoft Entra. Here, Entra steps in as the enforcer. Based on your conditional access policies, it demands multi-factor authentication from the guest before proceeding. Once the guest successfully completes MFA, verifying their identity, Entra issues a secure token to SharePoint. Only then does SharePoint grant the guest access to the specific document. This sequence proves that external collaboration, when configured with strict permissions and identity checks, is highly secure and entirely auditable. To wrap up, let's look at a real-time use case that is incredibly important, securing a project site. This scenario is a cross-functional launch involving internal staff and an external marketing vendor. The basics: we need a collaborative space, but we must protect internal budgets. Why are we doing this? To apply everything we've learned into one cohesive strategy. How do we execute? First, we create a SharePoint team site. The internal project team is added to the M365 group, automatically becoming site members with edit access. Next, we have a folder containing sensitive HR and budget data. We break inheritance on this specific folder, restricting access to only the site owners, making it invisible to standard members. Finally, for the external vendor, we do not add them to the M365 group. Instead, we generate a specific people, sharing link targeted only at the vendor's folder, and we set it to expire in 30 days. Let's walk through this final, real-world architecture graph. At the top, we have our project team site branching into 3 folders: general documents, vendor drop, and internal budgets. Look at the internal staff node on the left. By virtue of being M365 group members, they seamlessly edit general documents and the vendor drop folder, but note the red X: they are denied access to internal budgets because we broke inheritance. The project lead, acting as the site owner, has explicit full control across all 3 folders. Now look at the external vendor on the right. They are completely fenced off from the site at large. They access the vendor drop folder exclusively via an expiring specific people link. They cannot touch general documents or budgets. This architecture flawlessly blends group membership, broken inheritance, and targeted external sharing to create a highly productive, hyper-secure environment. Thank you for joining this training.